there are some housekeeping things which I'm obliged to say by law, and that's in the case of an emergency evacuation, there is the steps in which you came in the main entrance. There's another one here on the right-hand side, and if all else fails, there's another one over there at the back of the museum as such. For other emergencies, there are two toilets, one there and one over there. So anyway, I would like to, if you would put your phones on silent, please, so for the duration. Order of business will be as follows. I am going to briefly reflect on why we're here tonight. I will then invite the Laoghaire as first citizen of the Lord to speak, and then Mary Daly, who is our chairperson of the RMS Leinster commemoration group, and a very good chairperson, is what I have to say. She will then say a few words about the preparations for the National Commemoration Day, which is on Wednesday the 10th of October 2018. And then, after that, the Laoghaire will declare the exhibition officially open. Now, there are some people here tonight, but not that many, but they may be unacquainted with the RMS Leinster story. And to start with, what I would say is the name of a radio officer, Arthur Jeffreys, is on the War Memorial over here. And this reflects this former, what was known as the Mariners' Church when it was first built, and up to the time it closed down in 1972. And so he had obviously a connection with here, and I would also say that the crew of RMS Leinster, and indeed all the Royal Mail ships, would have come here if they were of the Anglican persuasion, because it was so convenient to where they would have docked down at Carlisle Pier. I would like to sort of put a bit of context on what probably happened in those days, because there are some excellent books on it, but just to give you some idea, to put some context for the proceedings tonight, I would imagine that as the Royal Mail ship Leinster departed from its very familiar berth down there in Carlisle Pier on the morning of the 10th of October 1918, our crew and our military passengers were all too well acquainted with the pitiless unpredictability of the Great War. The civilians probably had good reason to have confidence in this very fine ship and its captain, because she was a very fast ship, and crucially, she had an excellent reputation for evading submarines and reaching her destination on time and safely. Approximately 1 hour later, 3 deadly torpedoes launched from German submarine UB-123 sank this fine ship. And to try to imagine what it was like at the time, you could imagine that you had 1 minute you 800 passengers and crew are settling into a routine trip from Kingstown, as it was known then, over to Holyhead. And the next minute, if they are lucky enough to survive the torpedo blasts, they're donning life jackets and either boarding a lifeboat or struggling to survive in terrifying circumstances in freezing cold water, only 12 nautical miles from this building. That would be about 23 kilometres. Or worse still, they're trapped below, scalded by steam, or on fire, or seriously injured, saying their final prayers, and resigned to meeting their Maker. The heroism of fireman William Marr rightly forms part of this exhibition. And in fact, you can read all about it later in the guide I'll tell you all about it. But there's another person, and I particularly chose this individual because the British ambassador is here tonight. And her name is Louisa Parry. Louisa Parry is rarely mentioned. She does appear in the literature. But she was a 22-year-old Holyhead-born second stewardess on that ship. Louisa went downstairs, despite the fact the ship was sinking. She guided some women and children to the upper deck. She probably knew it wasn't good at that stage. And yet she went below a second time. And she went down to assist a woman and a small child in the cabin. The door of the cabin jammed shut behind her. The crew of RMS Leinster tried valiantly to release them, but to no avail. And they had to make a judgment for themselves because water was literally pouring down the corridor when she was going to sink. But you can imagine that all of those three, caught in that lonely cabin, by themselves, And we don't know the name of the woman or the child or anything about them, but they had to resign themselves to a tragic death by drowning. The point about Louisa Parley was that she did her duty. She did her duty as an employee of this Dublin Steamship Company. But as I would regard her as one of these true heroes in life, or true heroines in life, and she perished, displaying as Wordsworth eloquently said of those unremembered acts of kindness and love for her fellow human beings. She was some lady, and she was only 22. But these stories are replicated probably throughout the entire gamut of people that were involved in RMS Leinster, and some of them had dreadful deaths as well. Because when you start thinking about it, the numbers that died, 7 out of 10 of the 800 plus passengers and crew on board RMS Leinster perished on that fateful day. And its devastating impact spread far and wide. You see a whole range of flags along the wall here. It hit not only people who lived in Dublin and Laoghaire, particularly the crew and passengers, but it also spread throughout towns in Ireland, north, south, east and west, England, Scotland, Wales, the United States of America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and also the German sub-mariners of UB 123 who also perished somewhere in the North Sea, when we do not know, or where we do not know. And all we know about them, that we've been able to discover through contacts in Germany, is there were 36 of them, and we do not know anything about them at all. I therefore think that it's entirely appropriate that we in this Maritime Museum commemorate this dreadful disaster for all involved, and that means the German crew as well, in a respectful and a dignified manner in this former RMS church. And also, it pleases me no end to say, and Mary will allude to it, that will be done throughout the whole of Dublin right now, over the coming months. And we do that in honour of their collective memory and the sufferings that those who died went through, and the sufferings of those who survived must have gone through, because I'm sure there was not much counselling going in those days. They lived their lives. Some of them were seen around the town, and what surprised me later in life, I went to see fishing boats, and we fished around the Leinster, and no one seemed to know anything about it. It wasn't a subject for talking. So I'm very pleased that we are where we are now, that it is actually coming out in the public. So now, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I now want to invite the Coherent of Dublin back down to County Council, Councillor Oisin Smith, to speak.
Hello. On behalf of Dundee Rathdown County Council, I want to welcome the ambassadors, councillors, and you, ladies and gentlemen, here this evening for this commemoration of the centenary of the Leinster, the sinking of the Leinster, the opening of this exhibition here this evening. It's no exaggeration to say that Dublin Bay, that we know so well, the features of Dublin Bay, nearly all of them have come about as a result of shipwrecks. And we can start with Laoghaire Harbour, which of course was built to protect ships from running aground, from hitting the rocks in Dalkey or in Blackrock, even up by Ringsend and Irishtown when those were coastal villages, or hitting against the cliffs in Hove and being destroyed at night, or in snowstorms, or in rainstorms in rough seas. So many hundreds of people died on those ships. And in reaction to that, Dublin Bay, its main features were built. Obviously, Laoghaire Harbour is the first one you think of, but the stones for that were quarried from Dalkey, and so Dalkey was formed as a result of the shipwrecks. The town of Laoghaire is a planned town that came after the harbour. It was built to go with the harbour came first, there was only a village here before, and so the town itself is the result of reaction and, to shipwrecks, of an attempt to prevent the future loss of life of people travelling to this island nation or trying to do commerce. The railway that connects Dundleary into the city centre, again, is part of that infrastructure preventing shipwrecks. The large sea walls in the city centre that go along the Liffey, the North Wall, the North Bull, the South Bull, and then the islands that formed as a result of building those huge long sea walls, that 4-kilometre wall that leads from the city centre straight into the centre of the bay. And that resulted in the Liffey speeding up, sand coming out and swirling around the bay and creating Bull Island. So even the land features, even the coastline itself, the land of Dublin Bay, has been formed as a result of actions taken to prevent shipwrecks. So the shipwrecks are not just notable tragic events in our history, they're actually formative events that shaped Dublin